Well, hi, and welcome to the Dallas Film Podcast. My name is Tony Armour, and I am the Dallas Film Commissioner, and I'm very excited today. This is going to be an Oscar episode. This is our first official Oscar episode. We're going to talk about all of the different films and categories, and we've got a couple of Dallas-based film critics with us here today. I'm going to let them introduce themselves.
I'll go first. I'm Preston Barta. I write for the Denton Record Chronicle and FreshFiction.tv. I've been a professional film critic for about almost 15 years, started in radio, worked my way up through various outlets, and this is where I landed, and I'm very content. I have a family and now, so I'm having to balance a lot of different things, so I'm not as hungry about it as I used to be, but I still have my ear to the ground. I pay attention, and I will watch all the movies that are up for Best Picture and things like that, because the other person that is on here, we're a part of the Dallas-Fort Worth Film Critics Association, and I'm a part of the Critics' Choice Association. So we're choking on films by the end of the year. There's so much to watch, but very much enjoy this part of the season. This is my Super Bowl in a way.
Oh, great. And Todd, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, I totally agree with Preston's attitude about the award season. It's very fun. I'm Todd Jorgenson. I'm the president of the DFW Film Critics Association, and I write do some film writing for D Magazine here in Dallas, and then also for a website called cinemalog.com. Where a lot of my reviews are published, and I've been a critic here in this market for over 2 decades. So I still enjoy it just as much now as I did when I got started.
Well, what's there not to enjoy about your job is to watch movies, right? I mean, that's kind of like growing up. What more can you ask for?
Can't ask for anything more, right?
Yeah. Well, thank you both for joining us today. And so, like I said, today is our first ever Oscar episode. So I'm just gonna jump in and kind of ask you guys, in general, sort of a broad perspective, what do you think about this year's crop of Oscar nominees from, picture, director, and kind of everything else?
I think most years it's very strong, but I think this year in particular is very strong. I mean, if you look at especially the list of Best Picture nominees, I mean, I would be happy to see almost any of those films that are nominated win. And I think that there's just I think there's a lot of quality up and down the board. And I think one way that you can tell that is in some of the other, whether it's the acting or directing categories, when you see people who you think might have been snubbed, who might have, not made it into the list of 5 nominees in those categories. But when you say, okay, well, who should they replace? You can't really find anybody because everybody is so strong. And so that has me looking forward to this ceremony, I think, in particular, because there are a lot of, I think, just really strong categories and really strong work this year.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. I think this year, compared to some of the previous years, I've had a hard time kind of narrowing down my best of the year list. And many of these films that are up for Best Picture and up for these major categories are among them. And I've enjoyed almost all the same as Todd here. With there's maybe one or so that I'm not so hot on, but for the most part, I think any of these could win, or I'd be very happy about it. But I think there's one particular film that stands out. That's gonna the joke is Oppenheimer, but calling it Moppenheimer, that it's gonna clean up the award season. So
Yeah.
I think it is going to be the talk of the town for sure, especially after this weekend.
Yeah. Well, you know what? Let's start with Best Picture then, since we've already kind of started talking about that, and that's obviously generally the culmination of all of the awards. They always save the best for last, but everybody wants to know what's the Best Picture winner. And so, and thankfully you guys are the film critics, so you've seen all of them, and I've only seen a handful. I haven't been able to drag myself for 3.5 hours to see Killers of the Flower Moon yet, as much as I want to see that film. It's just, it's been impossible with my schedule. So let's just kind of I'm gonna read off just the list for our audience, and then we can kind of start in the conversation. So the nominees for Best Picture: American Fiction, Anatomy of a Fall, Barbie, The Holdovers, Killers of the Flower Moon, Maestro, Oppenheimer, Past Lives, Poor Things, and The Zone of Interest. And so, kind of just to get started, and Preston, we'll start with you. Overall impressions of the Best Picture nominees. Obviously, you said everyone thinks Oppenheimer will win. It's kind of 99% sure Oppenheimer will win. If it does, you kind of agree with that. And, let's talk about what you think of these nominees.
I think it's a very strong list. I think there's some films that I really enjoyed from 2023 that didn't happen to get nominated. That meant a lot to me. But when it comes to like creating my list each year, it's so much goes into deciding like what's the top of the year list. Most of the time, I'm as I mentioned at the top, like I'm a parent, and so I gravitate towards projects that are about fatherhood in some capacity, or just have a lot of emotional weight to it that gives me a lot to think about. And a lot of these films do accomplish that. I think American Fiction gives me a lot to think about and is a really great satire. And Anatomy of a Fall, I'm a sucker for courtroom dramas, and that film had me really sucked into everything that it had going on.
And how good was the kid actor in that movie? I mean,
oh my gosh, yeah! I wish that kid was nominated, really, because that's what I've been saying since I saw that film. Like, that kid is one of the best performances that I saw last year. And so, yeah, he's definitely a standout in that film.
Yeah, I remember, when I watched that, I literally just watched it on the plane coming back into the country, last week.
Yeah.
And not to give anything away, but I was just like, if you kill the dog, you will lose me. Like, I will boycott this movie if you kill the dog.
Yeah. That was a fantastic film. And of course, Barbie, probably most people saw that film. I don't think it's it's kind of lost some momentum, especially with like Greta Gerwig not getting nominated for Best Director. And it's just we mentioned, like Oppenheimer seems to be the big one. And I think it's going to walk away with the most awards, especially the top prize of the night. But yeah, with Killers of the Flower Moon, Maestro, Past Lives, Poor Things, Zones of Interest, like there's a lot to take away from each of those films. So I think overall it's a very strong list, and there's a lot to say about each of them.
Yeah. Todd, what about you?
Yeah, I tend to agree. I just think that I was really happy when the nominations came out, and saw a lot of my favorites of the year on the list. I think it's particularly impressive that there are three, kind of 2.5 foreign language films in the list of 10. Past Lives is kind of it's really mostly in English, but and after Parasite won a few years ago, there's clearly more of a push in that direction, and I think well deserved. I mean, The Zone of Interest for example, is just a mesmerizing film. I'm particularly partial to American Fiction, which is one that Preston mentioned. I think it's a brilliant satire. I think The Holdovers is a very strong character piece, but I would not object in any way to Oppenheimer winning, which I again agree with Preston on. I think it will win, and certainly all of the momentum in the award season so far is signaling that, and I think that's a very strong choice. It's a great epic biopic with I think a lot of broad-based appeal and historical interest and relevance to today. So I think it's a great choice.
Yeah. And it's interesting. Like I said, I've not seen all of them. Zone of Interest, I 100% am excited to still see that. Haven't seen that one, but I watched Past Lives recently, and I really enjoyed Past Lives. But the thing that struck me, and this is probably because as a film commissioner and as a producer, I've worked on 4 Hallmark Channel films, and when I watched it, I was like, oh, this is a Hallmark Channel film minus the joy, romance, and happy ending. It was just a deconstructed Hallmark Channel film, and to me, like I said, I thought it was good, but maybe because I've worked on so many of these other films that were similar to that, it didn't strike me as maybe as strongly as some of these other projects did.
Yeah, I think Past Lives I did put near the top of my list just because I tend to gravitate towards projects that are films that feature a lot of scenes where it's just two characters talking, and I like those type. I love having discussions. I like sitting here and like seeing what Todd has to say because we haven't had a chance to do that. I enjoyed that type of thing. And then when you look at Oppenheimer, a lot of it is kind of broken up. Mm-hmm. And that was personally, it was a big adjustment for me watching the film because not to sell it so cheap, but it's like a 3-hour long trailer because it's a lot of clips. Like it's a lot of segments, like just like little micro moments. But then by the end of it, when you get a little further into it, you're like, oh, I know what Christopher Nolan's trying to accomplish here. And so it all begins to click. While Past Lives, it's like slipping into a warm bath and then having a conversation. I guess that's the best analogy I could come up with. But yeah, I do enjoy Past Lives, but I also kind of see what you're saying about that as well.
Yeah, and again, I think it's because one, my girlfriend loves Hallmark Channel films, so I've seen a lot of them, and then having worked on 4 of them, like when I was watching it, I was like, oh, okay, this is the scene where they meet his kids, and then they separate, and she goes away, and she starts to get the job in the big city, and the guy stays at home, and then here's the dates that they have and the unique locations, and then the guy, and so the whole thing to me, I was like, oh, I get it, I see this whole thing, but again, I think perspective matters, right? Like when I've been close to those type of productions, then all of the little things check boxes for me. We talked a little bit about holdovers, and right before we recorded this podcast, we just recorded a podcast with Franz Wetterings, who was the gaffer and chief lighting technician on holdovers. And so I'm always a big fan of anything Alexander Payne does, and I really loved that film. And interesting, similar with Greta Gerwig, how Best Picture nominees, but neither of them nominated for Best Director, especially holdovers, right? Like. Yeah, it's Best Picture because of Alexander Payne. Like he made that film, he molds that film and the actors and everything. Maybe let's talk a little bit about, I don't know if we'll call them the snubs or whatever it is. Those 2 particular films not getting nominated for Best Director, even though Best Picture that a lot of times doesn't make a lot of sense.
In fairness, the holdovers likely will win for Best Supporting in the Best Female Actor Supporting or Best Supporting Actress category for Da'Vine Joy Randolph, who is fantastic, and all the performances are fantastic in that movie. All 3 of them, the 3 primary performances. But in terms of the question about getting snubbed, a lot of times it just when they expanded however many years ago to 10 Best Picture nominees from 5. It just sort of skewed it a little bit because only 5 directors can be nominated, and really, I mean, all 10 of the Best Picture nominees are well-directed films. I'm not saying that they're all great award, Best Picture worthy films, but they're all very well directed, and so. And as far as specific snubs, somebody has to get left out, and the holdovers is more of kind of a quieter, character-driven piece with a lot fewer kind of directorial flourishes to it. So that's kind of a natural, as I agree with you that Payne did a great job directing the film, but it sort of is a natural to leave out, I think, just based on that.
Yeah, no, especially when it's, 5 films versus 10 films, and there is an argument to be made for as far as the young actor who's in that film, who is literally just a student at the school that he plucks out of the school and then turns into now this hot name in Hollywood as far as an acting talent. That's because of Alexander Payne as well. So it's interesting, but yeah, someone does have to get left out. You would think that if you're going to expand Best Picture to 10, you'd also expand Best Directing to 10, since those 2 are so closely tied. But I know they're trying to keep that telecast shorter, so.
I don't know that either one of them should be at 10. I liked 5 a little bit better myself. Yeah. But,
well, I mean, we all know why they did it. They wanted to get, I think didn't it start with the Dark Knight year? Like the year that the Dark Knight.
It was the year after, I believe.
The year after the Dark Knight.
Was it because of that conversation?
Yeah, because, again, the Oscars is really a TV show, is what it is. And what's more important than a TV show is getting ratings for your show. And so the Academy's concern is, how do we get people to watch this thing? And you need to have, the big budget films as a part of it in order to get people to watch it. So it's interesting. I think that's something that people forget is, yes, this is a celebration of the past year in film, but what do people talk about the day after the Oscars? What are the ratings for the Oscars, and how did it do from that perspective? Is it relevant anymore? Maybe that's a question then. Are the Oscars still relevant?
For me, I've kind of lost. I'm just not into it as much as I used to be, but I still think that there's some relevance to it. It's still a big, especially for us critics, like we're from like September on, if not earlier, like this is all that we're doing. That's all that we're focusing on. And so I'm so well versed in that world of like getting Variety magazines and all the FYC stuff and screeners. So I don't know what it looks like to, maybe I should ask my wife, but she's also well versed in it too, because she gets all the screeners and everything on the doorstep. So, yeah, I don't know. I still see it, but I think that, I don't know, it's like interesting when like the projects that people, like actors and directors and filmmakers do after they win the Oscar, it just doesn't, I don't know. There's like a lot to be said about that, but I still think that overall, it's relevant, but maybe not quite as much as it used to. I would say that. I don't know. Todd's been in this much longer than I have, so you can speak to that.
Yeah. What do you think, Todd?
I think it'll always be relevant. I mean, as far as degrees of relevance and saying, is it more important than it has been in years past? Maybe not. Maybe it's dipped a little bit just because of the interest level in it. I mean, it's not drawing maybe the TV ratings, to go back to something that you were talking about, Tony, and that it maybe did in the past, and it maybe never will again. I don't know. I don't know that, I think trying to maybe chase TV ratings with this is a little bit of a folly, because I don't know that it will ever be quite as popular maybe as it once was. And there probably are various reasons for that have nothing to do with movies or award shows. Yeah. But there are obviously efforts, like you said, to kind of bump up the TV ratings and try to keep it to be event TV for this Sunday night. And, like the addition of several years ago of like a visual effects category, and now you get something where like Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 gets an Oscar nomination, and or the Mission Impossible films, get Oscar nominations. And I guess that's all fine and good. But and you'll always get the people that complain and say, why don't the superhero movies get Best Picture nominations or something? I mean, there have been some, Black Panther, but anyway, it's a balance between making it relevant to the film community and really rewarding great filmmaking and great film acting and all of the traditional things, and then also kind of bringing it into the modern age of sort of what a greater section of the fans want and expect.
Yeah, because it's really interesting because, as the media landscape has become more fractured, and, people don't have standard television anymore, right? Like everything is watched somehow on streaming or on your phone, even though people forget that TV is still free. This is still on ABC every year, right? You're like, all you need is an antenna and it doesn't cost you anything. You don't have to have a cable subscription to watch free television that's been free since the advent of television in the 1940s or whatever it was. It's always been free, and it still is because it's broadcast. I think that's, not to get sidetracked, but I think that's a message that the industry hasn't put out there enough that they could, that might bring more people back to TV, especially now as, costs are going up and people are trying to find a way to cut expenses. TV is still free. You just have to have an antenna. But that's a different kind of sidetrack conversation there that maybe plays into a little bit. And again, part of it always is, how do you get a younger audience interested? Like when I was a little kid, I wanted to see Raiders of the Lost Ark win Best Picture. It lost to Chariots of Fire in 1981. But I watched it as a kid because I was interested, because I loved Raiders of the Lost Ark. And so how do you get a younger audience engaged that then could develop a lifelong, love affair with the film industry and want to be involved in it and want to be really interested in it? Maybe that's an interesting question.
Yeah, and I think that's a tricky balance too, because it's that's probably another reason why they expanded to 10 from 5 Best Picture nominees, is so you could get something like Barbie as Barbie a Best Picture nomination. I don't think that would have been nominated if there would have only been 5.
Yeah.
And so, just as an example, there we can debate all day about which 5 are the best and which 5 would have gotten cut under that scenario. But Barbie is an example of a movie that was extremely popular and praised by a large group of people, and it gets a film like that in the top award category where it might not have gotten so otherwise.
Yeah.
I think we're going to see a lot of experimentation with this in the years to come, because there's already been talk about adding best casted film.
Yeah, they did. They just did add casting for casting directors as a category starting next year, I think. Is that correct? I
believe that's correct. Yeah. So I think I don't know, they're probably having conversations about the Golden Globes experimented with best blockbuster, and that was a way to kind of get more people in there. But then there was a lot of talk online about that category seemed completely pointless because Barbie just made so much money.
Yeah. And
then it gets kind of confusing. It's is it the movie that made the most money, or is it the best movie out of those blockbusters? And so there's a lot to probably make clear to people. And so I think they're going to try to find some ways to put some of those other films that we've been talking about, those bigger films that more people have seen, in there by experimenting like that.
Yeah.
And do it in a way to where it doesn't water down the significance of the other top awards. I mean, you don't want to just make it a box office competition. Mm-hmm. Right. Although we all know that that's such a significant part of the industry and for other reasons, but the Oscars are not really meant to reward box office performance per se. Yeah. I don't want to sound like an old man yelling at a cloud and saying that, but it's, Well,
what was there was a category, wasn't there a category maybe 2 years ago where they were like, this is going to be a new category in the Oscars, and there was such blowback that they were like, never mind, we're not having this category because everybody hates it and thinks it's stupid. And it was something related to that, right? It wasn't called Best Box Office, but it was something along those lines.
Yeah, I can't remember what that was. Best budget film or something like that.
Yeah, you know what I'm talking about, though, right? I'm not making it.
It was along the lines of a Best Blockbuster category. Yeah, it was something along the lines of that was, and the Golden Globes can do that because the Golden Globes is, they're obviously a lot sort of more freewheeling, and they've had their own issues.
It's just a boozy party that they like to throw every year, basically.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, hey, let's talk about some of the, we've talked a lot about Best Picture and little Best Director. Let's talk about some of these other categories. There are other categories within the Oscars besides those two. Obviously, the actor roles, actor, supporting actor, actress, leading actress. Talk a little bit about, kind of your thoughts on those particular categories. And Todd, we'll start with you.
You want me to tackle one in particular?
If there's anything we don't have to go through category by category. Pick one that stands out to you. Is there one performance between actor, supporting actor, actress, supporting actress that really stood out to you that you're like, wow, that's the one that you want to win, or you think should win, or just more was most impactful that you saw this year?
Well, I think one that's an example, I guess, would be in the Best Actress category. Lily Gladstone from Killers of the Flower Moon is the probable winner there, and I wholeheartedly support that. And I think that her performance was just amazing in that film. And part of the reason that it is because she is very much the emotional anchor of that film amid kind of all of the chaos around her, and she's also comparatively a very quiet presence in that movie compared to DiCaprio and De Niro, who have, a lot of the showier dialogue, and she's kind of is more responding to them. Mm-hmm. And just kind of, she acts a lot with her facial expressions, her kind of body language, and but yet she conveys a lot of emotion. She has a lot to say. And I think that it's just a really powerful performance, and one that it would be a very deserving win for her. I know she's spoken a lot about, the representation in the film and kind of how it means a lot to her, sort of from a personal perspective, in chronicling, the some of the struggles historically of indigenous people and the tribal nations. But I just think it's a really strong performance from an actress who has done good work in other films, but really deserves the recognition that an Oscar will bring.
Right.
I actually agree with that category. That's the category that I'm most interested and excited about, because with Lily Glad, it's almost like a war between stones. You got Lily Gladstone and Emma Stone. Yeah. But Lily Gladstone, at least in this late part of the season, she's picked up a lot of momentum. She won the SAG. She was not nominated for the BAFTA. But Emma Stone won a lot of awards leading up to it. And so it's an interesting category. But then you have someone like Sandra Hüller, who could be the dark horse of it all, because Anatomy of a Fall, I don't know how much. I don't believe that the Oscar voters kind of believe in this, like, well, it didn't win in this area, so we're gonna, put them in there. So I don't.
Well, and they're voted different categories. So it's, if you're an actor in the Academy, you're voting on actor. If you're a director in the Academy, you're voting director. So it's not like cross pollinating between sort of categories. So those are the people who are choosing it.
Yeah, but there's some international contention there, because from my understanding that 25% or so of the voters are internationally based. Mm-hmm. So you can't exactly rule it out. I don't think it's going to go that way. I really think it's going to go with Lily Gladstone. And I agree with everything that Todd said about her performance and the quiet intensity of it, how reactive she is to everyone. And so it just kind of depends on how people feel about having something that's a little more showier, like Emma Stone, that's funny and engaging, or someone but you can kind of go back to like Leonardo DiCaprio winning for The Revenant. It's a very quiet performance, but there's a lot more going on there. There was like a lifetime achievement type of thing going on there. So I don't know. There's a lot to discuss, but I would say Lily for the win for sure.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Like I said early on, I haven't seen all of these films yet, but I did see Anatomy of a Fall, and and Sandra Hüller, she did do such a good job that, like, kind of throughout the film, you're like, did she or didn't she? Did she or didn't she? Like, she really is able to play that in a way that you don't know. She plays that character like it could have gone either way at the end, and you wouldn't have been surprised with what happened there. As I try and speak in circles, not to give away the plot for those that haven't seen it yet.
Yeah.
And so maybe some of these other categories. Do you guys watch the animated features as well? Do you do you try and do everything, every category in every film? Because that's really grown a lot over the years as far as people paying attention to animated.
The animated feature you're talking about? Yeah, as long as we don't get into the shorts, I'm probably okay. Okay. But if you start asking me about those, I'll probably have to defer. But yeah, I mean, I watched the animated features, the documentaries where I can. I mean, sometimes those, in particular, the documentaries are a little harder to
they're harder to find,
catch up with. But yeah, I mean, sometimes they are, and sometimes they're also, and in the case of also the foreign films, they're a little bit kind of slower to be released sometimes in this country. But if you're asking about animated films in particular, I do think The Boy and the Heron is going to win. And it's hard to go against that. I think it's a very good film, but it's by Hayao Miyazaki, the Japanese filmmaker. It is a foreign language film, and this is more of where Preston was talking about a lifetime achievement award. I mean, he's around 80 years old, and he's been making these brilliant animated films for decades and decades. And this is may or may not be his last film, but it's probably realistically not his greatest, but it's certainly worthy of his a worthy entry in his filmography. And I think overall the animated category is not super strong, so I think it would be a worthy win.
Yeah, I agree. For all the reasons that he just said, but I feel like nipping at its heels a little bit is Spider-Man.
Sure.
Even though the Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse did win
the last time,
it did win last time. But to watch that film and see just how much hard work, there's been a lot of stories about it, even some controversial stories about how they worked a little too hard and didn't get the money that they deserved out of it. But to see like watercolor, all these different types of animation going on. Like I can't wrap my head around it. It's very much a puzzle box to me in the same way that Oppenheimer is in terms of a language piece. So I wouldn't rule that one out either.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. And I think, one of the categories that everybody really likes to pay attention to as well, and because we've had Roger Deakins on the podcast and he was nominated 16 times and a couple of Oscar wins, and we had Oren Soffer who did The Creator, we'd always love to talk about cinematography here as well. And some beautiful films this year. And it's not, people always think of like what's pretty on screen, right? But that's not always what cinematography is. It's not what's necessarily pretty, but how you're also telling the story within that as well. And some good, obviously some, Killers of the Flower Moon, El Conde, Maestro, Oppenheimer, and Poor Things, all for cinematography. Any thoughts on the cinematography category?
Todd, have you seen El Conde?
I have not seen El Conde. I wish I would have.
We'll just assume it's not going to win because probably a lot of other people haven't seen it either.
Right.
Just in my view, I mean, they're all very beautiful films to look at, and I mean, I guess I don't really have necessarily a preference in that category. I think that they're all exceedingly well done. Maestro with the color and the black and white, and Killers of the Flower Moon obviously is beautiful. Oppenheimer with again, it also shifts between color and black and white and a lot of different sort of visual elements, but I think Poor Things, which is just an outstanding film overall and has its own sort of visual language to it.
Yeah, and I think Oppenheimer as well, because a lot of the conversation has been around for the nuclear explosions, we didn't use CGI. They used some in-camera techniques and doing actual explosions and things like that. And so I think there's some leaning towards some of that practical effect type stuff that they did in that film that still looked amazing, that maybe pushes that one over the top. And I feel like, as discussed, that film is going to walk away with a handful of Oscars this year.
Yeah. I think it's probably Oppenheimer is going to be the one that wins, but Killers of the Flower Moon looks incredible with its landscapes. There's a slow motion shot pretty early on in the film when the oil is coming out of the ground that looks really good. And its color, Maestro, Todd spoke about that. But then you got Poor Things doing like fisheye lenses and and it's kind of like jarring to watch it because you're just like, whoa, it's making me feel uncomfortable sometimes. So it's requiring more of the viewer a little bit. It's more of an interactive piece, I guess, from a visual standpoint. But I think Oppenheimer seems to be like a pretty safe choice just because of it's just a force of the season. And I could see that just being another one where it cleans up.
Yeah. Is there another category that stands out to you, that's something that you really like, maybe is kind of like a little thing that as a film critic you just love? Like you love costuming, you love editing or music or whatever it is, because there's obviously music for original song and score, makeup and hairstyling. People forget makeup and hairstyling is a category, and it's super important for developing the look of the character and the feel of the character. And in the case of Bradley Cooper, prosthetic nose and everything else, even though that's been criticized for him doing that. But is there another category to you guys there that stands out, that just something that you have an affinity for, that you really like every year, that you kind of pay attention to?
Well, not necessarily something I pay attention to every year. It just sort of depends on year to year. But I guess there's always maybe a film or two that I just sort of would really like to see do well, even from a kind of an underdog perspective, and even though it's not really expected to do much. You were mentioning makeup and hairstyling. I mean, I know Preston was talking earlier about Poor Things. I mean, Poor Things is remarkable in that certainly in that way. One film that or one category that I think is taken on some kind of renewed interest in recent years is the best international film or foreign language film category, just because we've seen so many of those films kind of be sort of more present in other categories, whether it's Sandra Hüller in best actress, or whether it's, having two fully foreign language films in the best picture race, or, Again, Parasite winning a few years ago. And so, I just think that it sort of adds interest to international films in general, and maybe to the international category. A movie like there's a movie called Io Capitano that's in the Best International Film category. It's from Italy, but it takes place mostly in Africa, and I think it's just a remarkable film, and a film of remarkable humanity and compassion, and it's a film that's probably going to get overlooked, but I hope it's a film that people get to see. It is nominated, and and I'm so interested in, I guess, some of the great work being done around the world, and which has always fascinated me. But just to see films from different cultures, different perspectives, and there's just the Best International Film category is a lot of times well worth seeking out for more than just film nerds. I guess it would be. There's a lot of great stories being told there.
Great.
Yeah.
What about you, Preston?
For me, a personal category is film editing. That's part of my day job, is I edit things.
Okay, there you go.
I try to, whenever I'm watching something, I'm usually watching it probably not in the average viewer kind of way. I'm very meticulous film watcher. I'm like really paying attention to the art of transitions and things, and like the flow of film. And so I feel like that's like the secret sauce of the film to me. Like, so much depends on the tone, how they cut it together, and the flow of it. And so I get excited about that category each year. It doesn't always go my way. I think there's a movie like Bohemian Rhapsody that probably shouldn't have got that award. But for this year, like, as I mentioned with like Oppenheimer, like that's like that whole movie is a math equation and is operating at a level that's kind of beyond my comprehension. So I can't imagine like where you even start with that. Like, it has to be kind of like a visual essay, and I don't usually think in that kind of way. So that movie kind of disrupted my thinking a little bit. And so I hope that is where it goes compared to some of the other ones. But I do, like, as we were talking about with The Holdovers, like, it's a great hangout movie, and it has a nice kind of classic literature kind of feel to it. And then Anatomy of Fall, it's like you're into it. It's a thriller. And then Killers of the Flower Moon, there's a lot going on there as well. So yeah, that's an exciting category for me.
There could be an argument made that Killers of the Flower Moon should not be considered because some people are saying that Martin Scorsese has forgotten how to edit since it's 3.5 hours long, and and it could be 45 minutes shorter.
I think more criticism should be paid to the types of stories that he tells, because he's almost been telling the same type of story about the rise and fall of criminals in American Sin. But I think this is he fluffs it up in a very interesting way, making it about culture and so many other things. But 3.5 hours was definitely made my butt numb.
Yeah, no, we were having a conversation before we started this podcast with some of our staff here about how all of us, some of us have seen it, some of us have not, and how there were some independent theaters that were putting intermissions in it so people would actually come and watch it so they knew they could get a break. And then the studio said, no, you can't do intermissions. And it's kind of like, I mean, come on, guys, 3.5 hours. Like,
just watch it on Apple TV Plus. You can pause it and treat it as a miniseries.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. So, well, before we wrap up, any last thoughts on this year's Oscar nominees and kind of everything Oscar related before we finish up?
I mean, the Best Actor kind of has like an interesting race going on between Paul Giamatti and Cillian Murphy, but pretty much the exact same reasons that we've been saying up and down the categories that we've discussed so far. That, like, how do you award Oppenheimer Best Picture, Best Director, all these other awards, and then the titular character of Oppenheimer, like that's his movie,
right? So,
but he's also picked up a lot of momentum, and I think it's his to win, but it's still an interesting race. I don't know, that the whole In-N-Out Burger story with Paul Giamatti seemed to be a bit of a silly thing that was going on, but it got a lot of attention, and his speech at the Golden Globes was really good. So you can't exactly rule out the possibility that it could go another way, but I still think it's Cillian Murphy. And then with some of the supporting categories, we talked about Divine. I think she's a sure shot. We don't really have to discuss that any further.
Yeah.
But same with Robert Downey, but that one's more of a Lifetime Achievement Award to me personally. I think he has a really great scene in it, but there are actors like Mark Ruffalo that I find very, like, that's a totally different performance that I've seen him do. And personally, I would love to see it go that way. I don't think it is. I think it's just going to kind of go the way that we've been seeing it all season long.
Yeah. Todd, final thoughts on the Oscars?
Yeah, that was sort of my final thought as well, is that it just doesn't seem like there are a lot of categories that are ripe for upsets this year. It just seems like there's in a lot of the, if you look at like the 4 acting categories plus Best Picture and Best Director, it almost seems like they're all sure things, and you sort of hope for some surprises along the way. With Oppenheimer taking 4 out of those 6 being the likelihood, but I just think that, yeah, you hope that there's going to be some upsets along the way, but it just doesn't appear that there will be. And I mean, Oppenheimer is just a really strong film, and I guess it deserves what it gets. Although there's a lot of other great work that's going to not win, and that's the case every year.
Yeah,
but
that's it.
It just seems like maybe there's less opportunity for upsets this year than there have been. Hopefully, I'll be proven wrong.
We're not going to have a Moonlight La La Land type of upset going on. I will say, and this is the only time this probably will ever happen in my entire life. I saw Moonlight at the Toronto International Film Festival, and there was a lot of buzz around that film at TIFF that year. And I remember watching that film, and after it was over, the person sitting next to me, who I'd never met before, didn't know, I just turned to them and said, "That's your Oscar winner this year." And so that's my only claim to fame and that's the only person that actually knows that this happened, is the random stranger that I told that to in 2016. But it came true somehow, and so I retired from prognosticating on the Oscars after that.
Yeah, not to toot our own horn, but the Dallas Film Critics Association tends to be pretty good at picking like who's going to win Best Picture. Somebody did like something, because I run the Twitter page that we do, and I see all these responses, and somebody like did a whole chart of all the films that we picked and how it's lined up with Best Picture, and I'd say about 90% of them have been our picks. So maybe we're a good indicator too, or
so
we
take it to Vegas is what you're saying. Is like, before you go to Vegas for the Oscars every year, look at the Dallas Critics Association's votes.
Well, that's true, and this year, our group, me and Preston and 25 or so other people picked collectively the holdovers. So as narrowly over Oppenheimer.
Okay.
So who knows? Maybe that will be the little extra push it needs. Who knows?
Yeah. That'll fall into maybe the 10%, but
I think it will.
Yeah. Now that you've called it out, it'll definitely fall into the 10% category, right?
Yes. We're going to beat the commenters to the punch.
Yeah, that's right. Yep. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us. This episode should be out Friday, right before the Oscars. So anybody that's listening can listen to it before the Oscars. Hope everybody enjoys the show, enjoyed this episode, and thank you both so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Pleasure. Thanks.